Funny how a graduation invitation can open old wounds you thought were buried. The envelope had no return address, just my name, scrawled in that familiar cursive I hadn't seen in years. I almost didn't open it, but something in the weight of the envelope, or maybe in the weight of my silence, made me peel it open with a slow, cautious hand. Inside was a thick ivory card embossed in silver foil. Please join us in celebrating the graduation of Emily Morgan, my sister. Or what the world believed to be my sister. Beneath the glittering script was a note scribbled in blue ink. Hope you'll come, Claire. Try not to get lost like you did last time. I stared at those words as the paper trembled between my fingers. It wasn't just a dig, it was a reminder. A sharp, deliberate pull on the thread that unraveled me years ago. I leaned back in my chair, the creak of old wood echoing in the cramped office of my apartment. The winter wind outside scratched at the windows of the Albany walk-up I rented my quiet corner of exile. On the walls were old equations and circuit sketches, remnants of a girl who once believed in breakthroughs. On the desk bills, a coffee mug stained beyond redemption, and now this goddamn invitation. I remembered once telling Miles, half joking, half bleeding, Emily is the star they built from my rubble. He had laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because he didn't know what else to do. My phone buzzed. A name lit up Miles. I hadn't heard from him in over a year. Miles, you still have the original Helia code? Just wondering. The message hit like static through my chest. Helia. I hadn't let that word surface in a long time. Not since the scholarship board meeting. Not since Mom's narrowed eyes and Dad's cold voice. Claire, you're too sensitive. This is what's best for everyone. I had cried once in that sterile hallway outside the dean's office, gripping the rejection letter I hadn't earned. My project, my code was gone. My family had signed the dotted line and handed it over to Emily. She wore it like a borrowed dress, all while I was told to be proud. I pulled open the desk drawer, rummaging past the old chargers and tangled earbuds until my fingers brushed cold metal. The external hard drive. I hadn't touched it since 2019. Dust coated its edges like a layer of denial. I connected it to the laptop, hesitated, then clicked open the only folder that mattered. There it was, like a ghost refusing to rest, created by C. Morgan 2017. The cursor blinked next to the line of code that had started everything, my beginning and apparently my end. The room felt colder, or maybe it was just my skin remembering betrayal. I stared at that line as if it could speak, as if it could explain why I was the one left behind. A decade of silence, of swallowing rage and building a life no one noticed, condensed into this moment. I looked back at the invitation. It was lying there quietly, mocking me with glitter and grace. I thought I'd throw it out. But instead, I placed it neatly on the desk right next to the hard drive that still held my name, my future, and maybe my chance to rewrite the ending. Being erased hurts worse when the people holding the eraser are your family. The smell of rosemary and baked ham greeted me before the door fully opened. Everything looked just as I remembered, too clean, too polished, like a stage waiting for actors who knew their lines. Except I had long forgotten mine. Vivian stood at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, like I was the mailman delivering a package no one ordered. Her face was tight, unwrinkled by time or warmth. "You're early," she said, like that was a problem. "I figured the roads might be icy," I replied, trying for neutral. She didn't offer a hug. Instead, she glanced at the overnight bag in my hand. "That's not staying in the hallway. And don't talk about AI or anything." "Old? Old?" I echoed, blinking. "You know what I mean." She turned and walked toward the kitchen, not checking if I followed. I did. Out of muscle memory, more than willingness. The dining room was just as sterile as I remembered, white tablecloth, fine china, not a napkin out of place. Raymond sat at the head of the table, eyes flicking from his phone to the TV in the corner, showing local news with muted captions. He gave a soft, almost embarrassed smile when he saw me. "Claire," he said, nodding once. "Glad you made it." That was it. Emily breezed into the room a few minutes later, flushed from the cold, wearing the university's navy and gold hoodie like it was royalty's crest. She barely glanced at me before pulling out a chair. So she chirped, "I had lunch with Ms. Hartley today. She said the board is really looking forward to my speech. Apparently they want to highlight Helia as a case study in cross-functional collaboration. Cool, right?" I didn't answer. My fingers clenched around my glass of water as she chattered on about award dinners and PR photos. Vivian beamed at her like a mother watching her chosen child walk across a stage of stars. No one asked what I'd been doing. No one asked where I lived, if I was okay, or how I'd gotten through the last 2 years without them. I cleared my throat. "Actually, I've been thinking about Helia again." The room stilled, not a dramatic freeze, but something colder. Vivian's fork paused mid-air. "Claire," she said sharply, "you let it go. Don't ruin dinner for Emily." "I didn't let it go," I said, voice low. "It was taken." Vivian dabbed the corners of her mouth with her napkin, then folded it carefully. "You weren't ready to handle something that big. You would have embarrassed yourself and us. We did what was best for the family." "For the family," I repeated as if the words were made of ash. Emily busied herself with green beans, clearly uninterested. Raymond kept watching the news until it cut to a slow-motion clip of Emily at some gala last fall. He looked over, suddenly catching my eye. "You know," he said, smiling gently, "I just wish Claire had half of Emily's drive. Things might have turned out differently." The silence after that was absolute. Vivian didn't flinch. Emily kept chewing. Only I reacted because only I felt it. I looked up at him, my father, the man who once sat beside me helping with physics problems, who used to save my science fair medals in a dusty old shoebox. And it hit me he hadn't meant to wound me. Not really. But somehow that made it worse. Because if hurting me had been intentional, at least it would have implied I mattered enough to aim for. I didn't know which burned more, being forgotten or being rewritten. The video loaded without buffering, which felt like betrayal in itself. It was high definition, perfectly edited, framed with music that sounded like the birth of a revolution. The screen flashed with bold white letters, "Helia, the future of ethical AI," followed by a slow fade into Emily's face. She stood on a brightly lit stage, palms open in a gesture of vulnerability. "I began Helia as a student project," she said, her voice modulated for warmth. "But it quickly became something bigger. A vision of AI that listens, adapts, protects." I paused the video, rewound, pressed play again. "I began Helia." The cursor hovered over her face. The smoothness in her tone reminded me of Vivian's voice at donor events, practiced just the right amount of sincerity to feel authentic. Except it wasn't. None of it was. Not the words, not the origin story, not the name on the patent filings Miles had just sent me. The patent link opened to a digital record: Emily Morgan, inventor. Filed 2019. Guardian approval, Vivian L. Morgan. I scrolled down, numb. Every field had Emily's name, every timestamp fell, just after my forced withdrawal. And there it was, Vivian's signature, cold and familiar, the same one she used to sign permission slips and cancel my appointments without asking. Miles's message came through as I stared at the screen. "Miles. Thought you should see it before it goes viral. They're calling her the new voice of ethical tech." I typed back, "Did you know she filed it under her name?" He replied almost immediately, "No, but I'm not surprised." My chest tightened. Not from shock, I'd suspected something, but seeing it confirmed, documented, and celebrated, that was a different kind of pain. I dug through my old folders, some local, some in cloud storage I barely remembered still existed. In one buried 3 subfolders deep, I found the Helia presentation from 2017. My name was in the title slide, Helia Ethical AI Systems, by Claire Morgan. Date stamped. Version logged. And then, in a folder I didn't even recognize, titled Backup Pot Presentations, I found the audio file. It was from Professor Yates's seminar. I remembered that day half the class had skipped, and I had volunteered to present Helia solo. The audio was scratchy but clear. Good afternoon. My voice began shaky but determined. Today, I want to introduce you to Helia. She's not just reactive, she anticipates human need without overstepping autonomy. I fast-forwarded. Timestamps aligned. The submission email to Professor Yates was still in my inbox, buried but intact. I leaned back in my chair, the dim light of my apartment flickering against the walls. The same apartment I'd worked 2 jobs to afford while Emily gave press interviews. They erased me from the narrative. Worse, they rewrote me as a footnote to Emily's glory. But now, I didn't need validation. I didn't need them to believe the story I was about to tell. I just needed them to remember the name that belonged on Helia's first slide, and now I had the proof to make them. To fight back, you don't need weapons, just proof. The university library smelled the same aged paper-varnished wood, and the ghost of all-nighters passed. I hadn't stepped foot on campus in nearly 5 years, yet my feet knew the way to the archive wing without asking. The corridors were quieter now, students hunched over tablets instead of textbooks, but the weight of memory clung to every creaking floorboard. Ms. Hartley arrived 5 minutes early as always. She looked older, less rigid around the eyes maybe, but the moment she saw me, her expression flickered with recognition, then concern. "Claire Morgan," she said softly, pulling me into a quick, unexpected hug. "You disappeared." "I didn't vanish," I replied, smiling tightly. "I was erased." We sat in one of the side rooms, the ones used for thesis reviews and disciplinary meetings. Ms. Hartley pulled out her laptop, tapping in credentials I could only dream of still having. I slid over my flash drive. "This is the presentation from 2017. Do you remember it?" She squinted at the screen, then her eyes widened. "Of course I do. You presented it solo. Your classmates didn't even show up. I wrote you a recommendation letter after that, never heard back." "I never got it," I said. "They pulled me out before it reached me." She clicked through files until she found the university server copy archived, time-stamped, watermarked. There I was standing under a projector in the engineering wing, voice steady, but nervous. My name hovered in bold beneath the Helia title. She leaned back, eyes narrowing. "So why does the university press kit list your sister?" I met her gaze. "That's what I'm here to fix." After we verified the metadata and exported a clean copy, I walked to the old coffee shop across campus, the place where I used to revise code between lectures and nurse caffeine-induced hope. I opened my laptop and crafted the bait. Subject: Collaboration Inquiry, AI Development History, to Ms. Hartley CC at minutecharchive.edu mtson, Morgan, ihelia.com. Accidentally included v.morgan, morganfoundation.org. Body: Hi Ms. Hartley. Thank you again for your help verifying the Helia presentation archive. I'm compiling sources on the origins of student-led AI research. Given how often the Morgan sisters are referenced, I thought it worth asking who actually authored the core logic. There seems to be confusion. Any clarification would help. Warm regards, Claire. I hit send. The response came that evening. Vivian replied not to Ms. Hartley but directly to me. Vivian Morgan, Claire. Your tone is inappropriate. Whatever confusion exists, I trust you'll remember the consequences of dragging family into public drama. Emily worked hard to shape Helia into something marketable. I will do whatever is necessary to protect her name. Vivian. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise cloaked in white gloves. The kind that came from boardrooms and legacy dinners. Miles met me that night, our conversation quiet and clipped over 2 mugs of burnt decaf. "She's rattled," he said, sliding the printed email across the table. He'd sealed it in a manila envelope, as if it were evidence in a trial that hadn't begun yet. I looked down at her words, crisp in black ink. The silence in her voice was louder on paper. "This isn't enough," I muttered. Miles nodded. "No, but it's the first sign of fear. Sometimes the best revenge is just clarity." The security badge still worked. Miles smiled when the green light blinked, unlocking the heavy glass doors to his old server lab. "Guess no one thought to deactivate my access," he said. Half proud, half nostalgic. "Corporate turnover's good for something." I followed him in the air, colder than expected, humming with machines, half alive, half forgotten. The servers lined both walls like ancient guardians. Most had been shut down, but a few blinked with idle power, stubborn reminders of a time when code was poetry and ambition wasn't a threat. Miles led me to a workstation near the back, booted up a console, and typed in a string of commands I hadn't seen since senior year. "You sure this place still holds the old logs?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he pulled up a buried directory path nested under layers of obscure folders and file names no ordinary tech would touch. Then he turned to me with a smirk. "Helia didn't start as a product, Claire. It started as a dream you built in here, line by line, after hours when everyone else had gone home." The monitor flashed, retrieving archived data. Within seconds, a set of log files appeared. He clicked into one marked AI Legacy C1 Toy H. There it was, the core logic module, the original version of Helia's empathy routing algorithm, the one that adapted to emotional cues based on nonverbal input. Miles had called it dangerous back when we still thought Helia could change the world before anyone tried to tame her. "Look," he said, pointing to the metadata string, author C. Morgan, timestamp. March 14, 2017, 03:12 a.m. Checksum verified. No modifications detected. I stared at the screen. I didn't speak. My throat had closed around something between a sob and a laugh. "It's intact," he said, "and unalterable. These servers kept backups in read-only format. That timestamp is as good as a notary." I blinked, the weight of 5 years settling behind my eyes. All this time, I'd carried shame like it was a punishment I deserved, like walking away from Helia had been weakness, not survival. But this was my name carved into the spine of the one thing they couldn't erase. My phone buzzed. "Ms. Hartley, I've reviewed the archive files. That's Claire's code. If legal steps are required, I'll testify. But be careful, Vivian has powerful friends and a longer reach than you think." I showed the message to Miles. "She's in," I whispered. He nodded, thoughtful. "Then we've got the algorithm, a timestamp, a university witness, and a clear pattern of misattribution." He folded his arms. "That's not just a case, Claire. That's leverage." We stood in silence for a beat, the quiet filled with cooling fans and buried hope. I glanced toward the exit, half expecting someone, Vivian maybe, to burst through the doors with an injunction or a smug laugh. Instead, the world held still. We packed up everything: drives, screenshots, logs, and the printed metadata. He handed me a sealed envelope. "Keep it safe," he said. "This is your sword." We stepped outside into the brittle February air. Snow drifted around our feet like feathers shaken loose from something wounded but not yet dead. I looked up at the sky, gray, low-hanging, unreadable. I didn't know if this would be a win. But this time, when they spoke of Helia, they would speak my name, even if it was just once. When the system fails, you build your own court. Miles had cleared a corner of his temporary office for me, a desk wedged between a 3D printer and a shelf full of dusty prototypes. It wasn't glamorous, but the folding chair didn't creak, and the internet connection was good enough to upload 3 gigabytes of truth without blinking. I'd stopped sleeping through the night. My dreams felt like fragments of unfinished code loops that never closed, warnings that never silenced. But for the first time in years, I wasn't just enduring. I was building again. Across from me sat Mr. Gentry, a man who looked like he should have been lecturing at a law school or intimidating a boardroom, not sipping lukewarm coffee in a startup loft. The timestamp matters, he said, eyes scanning the metadata with the intensity of a surgeon. Even more so when you have third-party server logs and unaltered file checksums. He gestured to the printed affidavit Ms. Hartley had emailed that morning. And a witness with tenure and access credentials? That's weight. Enough to trigger an internal academic investigation, maybe even reverse the attribution record. I watched him carefully. What about legal ownership? The name on the university patent registry is Emily's. Gentry didn't flinch. If we can show misrepresentation and coercion, especially since you were a student under guardianship, you might not just get your name restored. You could expose the entire scholarship fraud under your mother's foundation. That word, coercion, lingered like ash. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Ms. Hartley, subject line, archived lecture notes. The PDF opened to a grainy scan of her handwritten feedback circled around my name, Claire Morgan. Original, Helia concept, excellent emotional logic structure. Recommend solo review session. She'd saved everything. And someone else had buried it. I turned to the screen and clicked open a bookmarked video, Tech Talk Live, Emily Morgan on AI and empathy. It was less than a week old. I pressed play, the audio slightly out of sync with the video. Emily smiled stiffly on screen, dressed in the kind of blazer that tried too hard to impress tech investors. So Emily, the host, said, "What inspired Helia's emotional response system?" That's not something most AI models attempt. Emily's smile faltered for a second too long. Well, it was sort of a collaborative process. I drew from a few early student projects at my university. The framework evolved over time. She never said my name. Not once. But her eyes darted to the side as if she knew the lie was stretching too thin. By evening, Miles and I had assembled the full archive: videos, code logs, screenshots, affidavits, server entries, old presentation slides, even the clipped interview moment. I bundled it all under one file name, Truth, Helia.zip. Every folder inside had timestamps, version histories, verified authorship. I created read-only backups on 3 different cloud systems, and Miles secured a copy offline. And then I wrote the email. To ethics@northfield.edu, subject formal petition attribution, misrepresentation, Helia project body, Dear Board of Academic Integrity. I am submitting evidence for your review concerning a misattribution of authorship on the Helia AI project developed during my enrollment at Northfield University, 2016-2017. The attached documentation includes time-stamped code archives, lecture records, witness statements, and original design files. I request a formal review under the institution's scholarly ethics policy. Sincerely, Claire Morgan. Former computer science major class of 2018. I attached the zip file. For a moment I hovered. Once I sent it, there was no undo. No more quiet. No more pretending this wound hadn't festered behind every job rejection, every awkward family dinner, every time someone said Emily's the genius in the family. I hit send. The screen blinked once. Email sent. I leaned back and exhaled. There would be no going back. Sometimes the smallest stone makes the loudest ripple. I didn't need headlines or courtrooms. Not yet. What I needed was a question. Something that cracked the surface just enough for people to start wondering. So I sent one slide. It was the title page from my 2017 Helia presentation, plain black and white, time-stamped in the bottom right corner with my name beneath the project title. I didn't add commentary or context. Just a subject line. Who wrote Helia? First, I sent it to a student-run blog at Northfield University called Code and Coffee, still active after all these years. I chose them because they were small, irreverent, and famously hard to shut up. By noon the next day, the post was live. It read, Slide of the Week, the original Helia, submitted anonymously, date stamped spring 2017, credit Claire Morgan. That was it. No accusation, no drama. But by nightfall, it had over 12,000 views, hundreds of comments, and was trending on the school's subreddit. Someone dug up a grainy recording of me presenting Helia in Yates' seminar, the same file Miles and I had archived. Someone else shared a quote from an old student forum where I mentioned my work on emotional logic and AI. And then the email started. From Vivian.L. Morgan Foundation Legal. Org subject urgent, defamatory material, to whom it may concern. It has come to our attention that your publication has circulated a misleading and damaging claim regarding the Helia AI project. The document published is taken out of context and presents a false narrative that harms the reputation of both Emily Morgan and the Morgan Foundation. We demand the immediate removal of this post and a formal retraction or further legal action may be pursued. Sincerely, Vivian L. Morgan. They signed it like they were talking to strangers, as if I hadn't grown up under that name. Miles texted me a screenshot. She bit. Thought she wouldn't. She did. I was sitting outside the engineering building just a few feet from where I'd once given my first pitch for Helia under a rusting gazebo. Back then, only 3 people had shown up. One of them was Miles, another was Ms. Hartley. Now they were arguing over me in forums and Slack threads. I wasn't invisible anymore, but I hadn't expected Emily to call. It was just past midnight. I almost didn't answer when I saw her name. Then I did. Claire. Her voice was tight-clipped, like she was holding something back, or holding something together. I said nothing. I saw what you posted, or whatever blog that was. Is this what you've been planning to destroy my name? It's just a slide, I said quietly. Emily exhaled sharply. Do you have any idea what this could do to me? I'm about to present at the Horizon conference. They're reviewing my credentials. If this keeps spreading, I let her words hang. Let the panic inside them echo in the silence between us. You're really doing this, she whispered. All over one project. I didn't tell her it was never just about Helia. It was about being erased over and over until I barely remembered what my own voice sounded like. It was about watching my mother sculpt her into a symbol using the pieces she'd chipped off me. Instead, I said nothing. Are you even going to respond? She asked, voice trembling. I stared out across the quad. The wind rustled the trees like applause from ghosts of who we once were. Still, I didn't answer. But I heard it. In her voice, just beneath the practiced tone and the cracks forming at the edges, I heard it. Fear. The kind I used to carry alone. The kind that didn't just knock at the door, it lived there. And that was enough for now. You don't have to raise your voice to make someone shake. I didn't get an invitation, but I showed up anyway. The ceremony took place in the grand auditorium at Northfield University, red carpets, white tablecloths, and a line of velvet ropes herding guests into assigned rows. Balloons floated along the edges of the ceiling and a glossy banner read, Annual Innovation Honors, celebrating the future. I sat in the back, near the exit. No name tag, no family section. Just me. The speaker on stage was mid-sentence. And finally the dean beamed. We honor a remarkable young mind, Emily Morgan, for her leadership and ingenuity behind Helia, the emotional logic AI that's already gaining national attention. Applause swelled around me like static. Emily stepped up to the podium. She was radiant in her blue blazer, her hair curled and pinned with mathematical precision. But when her eyes scanned the room, they snagged on me. A flicker. Just one. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply held her gaze until she looked away. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled into the reception hall for wine and finger food. I waited near the side door watching the sea of small talk swirl around my parents. Vivian stood poised, elegant as ever, speaking with the director of the Morgan Foundation's Scholarship Committee. Raymond stayed close, nodding like a well-trained shadow. When they finally broke from their cluster, I stepped forward. Raymond saw me first. His expression registered shock, then confusion, then something older. Regret, maybe. "I didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. "I came to return something," I replied. I slipped a small USB into his palm. "Give this a look if you still think I deserve a place at the dinner table." He opened his mouth but said nothing. Vivian, however, turned sharply at the movement, her eyes locking onto mine. We stared at each other in a vacuum of sound. I took a step closer, lowered my voice just enough to keep the moment between us, but not so low that those around couldn't catch it if they tried. "I'm not going to scream," I whispered. "I won't even raise my voice. All it takes is someone pressing play." Her smile didn't break, but something in her gaze twitched. Not fear, not yet, but a sliver of uncertainty. She turned away with the grace of a queen dismissing a jester. But I knew the wound had landed. I walked past them out into the cold March evening. The air bit at my skin, but it didn't matter. Later that night, Miles texted me. "Who posted the video?" "What video?" I replied, though I already knew. The link arrived seconds later. A private post on the faculty network visible only to verified academic accounts. It was my presentation. Me, at 21, hands shaking slightly, voice cracking as I introduced Helia's core logic model to Yates's seminar. It was grainy but unmistakably mine. The file name original Helia Schaffounder.mp4. No name, no caption, no author. But it didn't need one. By the next morning, over 100 faculty members had viewed it. Another 60 students. Someone in the IT department tried to trace the upload and failed. It was masked, rerouted through several academic proxies. Miles didn't do it. I didn't do it. Ms. Hartley swore it wasn't her. But someone had pressed play. Truth always leaks. Especially when someone tries to seal it. The letter arrived not in a manila envelope, but as a PDF attachment, cold and clinical. Subject line: cease and desist. Morgan v. Morgan. My name against hers. My mother's. The text was clear. I was to immediately halt all defamatory activities concerning Emily Morgan and the Helia project, or face legal consequences. I stared at the screen, half expecting it to blink or glitch, like my mind trying to buffer disbelief. The irony twisted itself in my gut. Vivian had chosen the courtroom as her weapon. Not truth, not conversation. Threats dressed in legalese. Miles sat across from me, jaw tight. "She's bluffing," he muttered, but his fingers kept drumming the table. "She's calculating," I corrected. "Bluffs are for gamblers. This is a maneuver." He exhaled. "You're still going to meet with your dad?" I nodded. He asked. "Privately." Raymond picked the side alley of a bookstore, downtown, neutral ground with no paper trail. I arrived early, scanning for him out of habit. When he showed, his shoulders were hunched, his gaze flickering like a man unsure whether to sit or run. I read the letter he said, without preamble. "Vivian. She's serious." "She always is," I replied. He looked down at his coffee fingers, trembling slightly. "Do you believe you'll win?" It wasn't the question I'd expected. Not, "What do you want?" or "Why now?" Just a quiet inquiry into the odds. "I don't know," I said, "but I know I can't lose without showing them who wrote Helia." He nodded slowly, then pushed a business card toward me, his own worn and folded. "If this escalates, I'm not saying I'll testify, but I won't lie either." It was more than I thought he had left in him. A crack in the concrete. Later that day, I crossed the campus grounds on my way to Miles's workspace. The air was brisk, the wind slicing through Albany like whispered accusations. That's when I saw her, Emily, alone in her car parked near the engineering building. Her head rested on the steering wheel, her shoulders heaving. I couldn't hear her, but her body told the story. She was crying. I paused. She didn't look up. I didn't knock. For once, we were both observers separated by glass and silence and everything unsaid. Back at the lab, Miles was waiting, eyes glinting. "You're going to want to see this," he said, flipping his laptop toward me. It was an email, a short one, dated July 2018. From Vivian Morgan to the Dean of Academic Affairs. The subject line, Claire Morgan. I read it twice before the weight of the words landed. Please ensure Claire Morgan is not referenced in any future documentation. She is no longer affiliated with this institution, nor with any derivative research. It is imperative this is upheld for the integrity of the program. My throat dried. Miles clicked again, pulling up metadata timestamp server origin routing path. It was real. "She erased you," he said softly, formally, "and left fingerprints," I whispered. He leaned back. "Some people bury bodies. Vivian buried a name, but she forgot something." I looked at him, eyebrows raised. "Buried things come back up, especially when you dig." He smiled faintly, and I knew he'd already started cross-referencing every internal memo, every policy amendment made after my departure. She'd tried to wipe me from the history books. Now we had her handwriting on the cover page. And I realized then this wasn't just about Helia anymore. It was about what happens when power tries to rewrite truth and the footnotes refuse to disappear. And I realized there are things you don't need to hack, only dig. She'd buried herself years ago. Even silence when archived becomes evidence. The hearing wasn't in a courtroom, but the air carried the weight of one. It took place in the conference hall adjacent to the dean's office, one of those sterile beige rooms more suited for alumni dinners than reckonings. But today it housed a reckoning nonetheless. I walked in holding a black folder, thin but heavy in its consequence. Miles stood beside me, not speaking, just offering a quiet nod. Ms. Hartley sat in the second row back, straight hands folded neatly in her lap. Her presence steadied me more than I'd expected. At the head of the room was a semicircle table behind which sat the dean, the academic affairs officer, and 3 professors. A few graduate students lingered in the back, pretending to organize documents. In truth, they were there to witness something no email thread could contain. No formal transcript would record today's events. It was unofficial, a courtesy, not a process. But it was the first time in years someone had invited me to speak without cutting me off. I cleared my throat. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." I placed a flash drive onto the center table and clicked the remote in my hand. The screen behind me flickered to life. First, a slide dated 2017, Helia's original title card with my name clearly stamped across the bottom, Claire Morgan. Next came the recorded video, grainy but undeniable. Me, younger, nervous, but speaking clearly, explaining the predictive logic models that made Helia adaptive. The timestamp hovered in the corner like a silent witness, March 22, 2017. Then came the email logs, archived threads between me and Ms. Hartley, her feedback, her encouragement, her approval. And finally the log file, AI Legacy C1.H, recovered from the lab, still bearing my initials untouched, pristine. I stopped speaking. The silence in the room grew sharp. Ms. Hartley broke it. "I graded Helia myself. Full marks. Because Claire Morgan wrote and presented it. Alone." She didn't raise her voice, but it landed like a bell in a cathedral. One of the professors leaned forward. "And Emily Morgan didn't attend the final AI seminar that year," Ms. Hartley answered calmly. She was studying biostatistics at the time. I could feel my pulse behind my eyes. The dean glanced at the materials again, tapping a pen against his lip. "We're not positioned to render a final judgment today. This is substantial and deserves thorough review." Miles handed over a packet, the printed version of every file indexed and time-stamped. "Claire's not demanding recognition," he said evenly. "She's demanding accuracy." At that moment the door opened and a staff member entered, handing a printed stack to the dean. He skimmed the top page, eyes widening slightly. A petition, he murmured. Signed by 28 alumni, most from the 2017 cohort, requesting a formal academic inquiry into the Helia crediting process. I didn't know who had organized it. I hadn't asked anyone, but someone had remembered. Someone had watched and known and acted. The dean folded the paper. We cannot act hastily, but we also cannot ignore what has been presented. I bowed my head slightly, the air leaving my lungs in a way that felt more like gratitude than fatigue. For years I had been arguing with shadows. Today those shadows had names, faces, rooms to sit in. As I gathered my things, the dean spoke again, quietly but firmly. Thank you for your time, Miss Morgan, the original creator. I froze. The folder in my hand trembled just a little. For the first time in 5 years, someone in this institution said my name, and meant it. The masks always fall. The only question is, who's watching the hearing room wasn't grand, but it felt heavier than any courtroom. No cameras, no journalists, just polished wood, a digital recorder on the table, and a panel of 3 academic board members tasked with sifting through 5 years of buried truths. Vivian sat across from me in a navy blue suit posture carved from marble. To her left, Emily looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in the way her eyes darted to the floor, to the ceiling, anywhere but at me. Miles sat beside me, not as my lawyer, but as the quiet spine I leaned on when the room grew too cold. Ms. Hartley was in the back row, dignified and still a silent bulwark. The lead investigator, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an even steelier tone, addressed me first. Miss Morgan, you may proceed. I stood and placed a binder on the table, opening it slowly. This is the original timestamp of the Helia core module, I said, sliding forward the printout. Created March 22, 2017. This is the video of my final seminar, same date. This, I held up another sheet, is the grading rubric with Ms. Hartley's signature. And this is the project's changelog from the university server, showing no edits after I submitted it. There was no gasp, just the sound of pages being turned, pens scribbling notes, and the hum of silence growing more undeniable. One board member adjusted his glasses. Miss Emily Morgan, would you care to respond? Emily shifted. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her lips parted, then closed. The board member continued. You are currently credited as Helia's principal creator. Given this evidence, can you explain the omission of your sister's name in the project's later phases? Vivian didn't wait. She leaned forward, voice smooth. Claire voluntarily withdrew from the project. She was unstable at the time, emotionally compromised. I stepped in to ensure Emily's version of Helia could be developed to its full potential. Excuse me, another board member cut in. We're asking Miss Emily Morgan. Emily flinched slightly. Her mother's hand twitched toward her, then froze midair. Emily, the board member pressed. Why wasn't Claire's name included? Emily's eyes found mine for a fleeting second. Then they dropped again. Vivian straightened in her seat. This is turning into a character assassination. Claire's bitterness doesn't rewrite history. I'd like to remind you, the investigator said sharp. Now this is a formal inquiry. Your cooperation is required. Vivian's mouth pinched shut, but her eyes burned through me like I was a virus she couldn't scrub. The third panelist, quiet until now, cleared his throat. Let's return to the foundational work, he said. The initial logic design of Helia's emotional response engine. Who authored that? Pause. Emily blinked, then looked at me again. But this time, she didn't look away. She spoke quietly. Not me. Vivian stiffened beside her. The room held its breath. I didn't design it, Emily continued. I studied it, sure. Cleaned it up. Rewrote parts for integration. But the original, the core, algorithm. Her voice faltered, then steadied. That was Claire's. I only ever tried to continue something she'd already written. My chest didn't rise. It didn't fall. It stayed suspended mid-breath somewhere between disbelief and an ache that had waited too long. Vivian turned toward her daughter, eyes wide in shock. Not anger. Not yet. Just disbelief that the performance had cracked. Emily didn't meet her gaze. I hadn't expected it from her. Not now. Not like this. But there it was, the truth spoken aloud, not in whispers, not behind screens, not buried in timestamps. And not from me. Truth doesn't scream. It just waits for silence. The room hadn't cleared. After Emily's confession, the board asked for a short recess, but no one really left. We all just shifted in our seats, quietly orbiting the tension that had cracked through Vivian's porcelain world. I could feel her watching me like I was the contagion she couldn't cleanse. But for once, I didn't look away. I opened my folder again, and this time I removed a page I hadn't shown before. This, I said, standing slowly, is the original withdrawal form, the one I allegedly signed in 2017 to forfeit my rights to Helia. Ms. Hartley raised her head. I never saw that document filed through the faculty board. I nodded. Because it was submitted directly to the legal department through my mother. Vivian flinched, subtle but telling. Miles passed out copies of the document. Then, from another sleeve, he produced 3 assignments I'd submitted during my final semester, each signed in my usual scrawl. Looping sharp, always slightly angled to the right. Compare the signatures, he said. A long moment of silence stretched, the kind that doesn't settle, it sharpens. One of the board members, an older man with forensic training, peered at the 2 samples. "They're not a match," he murmured. "Not even close." The university's legal counsel stepped forward. "We ran handwriting authentication after Claire requested a review. Our expert confirmed a 94% likelihood of forgery." The withdrawal form was not signed by Miss Morgan. All heads turned to Vivian. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes, always so icy, so composed, flashed wide with the kind of panic you can't rehearse away. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice rising too fast. She wasn't stable. She was wasting her chance. Helia would have died in her hands. "You forged my signature?" I said, not loud, just enough. Vivian snapped toward the board. "I protected this school from embarrassment, from scandal. I made sure your most promising student succeeded. You made sure your favorite daughter had my name on her diploma," I replied. And then Emily stood up. Her chair scraped back against the floor. She looked at her mother, not like a daughter looks at a parent, but like a witness looks at a suspect. "You forged Claire's name," she whispered. Vivian turned to her. "I saved you." "No," Emily said, her voice cracking. "You used me." The board didn't interrupt. The room didn't breathe. Miles handed the investigator a final envelope, sealed, dated, time-stamped. "Claire's original copy," he said, "found in her old backup drive. Unsubmitted. Unsigned." The lawyer nodded. "We've matched the digital metadata. It's legitimate." Vivian stumbled back a step. No one helped her. "I was trying to protect the family," she said again, but it sounded different now, shrill, unraveling. "You think this matters? You think anyone cares? Who wrote the first lines of some code?" The dean finally spoke, his voice level but iron-wrought. "We care that someone lied to an academic institution. We care very much." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For the first time, the room wasn't trying to decide whether I belonged in the story. Everyone was simply facing the fact that I always had. When a lie unravels, it pulls everything attached to it. The announcement came on a Tuesday. A plain PDF attached to an email with the subject line, "Disciplinary Decision, Morgan Case." No dramatic press conference, no flashing headlines, just 10 pages of words that dismantled years of silence. I read it alone at my kitchen table under the same flickering ceiling light I'd ignored for months. "Vivian Morgan is hereby suspended indefinitely from all educational sponsorship programs affiliated with Schroon Lake University and its partner institutions. Effective immediately. She didn't show up to contest it. No appeals, no rebuttals. Just disappearance, the quiet kind that leaves questions louder than answers. Rumor had it she left town the night after the hearing. Some said Florida, others whispered Canada. I didn't care. For once, her absence was enough. The next announcement, however, made me pause. Emily Morgan has formally declined her honorary distinction in academic innovation and requested her removal from the Helia development credits. I blinked at the screen, rereading the sentence. There was no justification attached, no public apology, just a single act of undoing, like she'd peeled her name off the plaque with her own fingers. That night, an email came through from a name I hadn't seen in years. Jamie Yu, a classmate from my final seminar. Subject: I owe you. The message was short. Claire, I remember how they all ignored you when you spoke about Helia. I was one of them. I believed the version of the story I was told, not the one I saw. I'm sorry. You deserved better. Thank you for writing the code that taught me how to think. I didn't respond. I didn't know how. But I saved the email. In the days that followed, the university published a memo urging departments to reevaluate their intellectual property policies. Forums lit up. Debate brewed. Some defended Emily. Others attacked Vivian. A few tried to rewrite history again, but this time it didn't stick. The documents were public now. So were the timestamps. I visited the old seminar room one afternoon unannounced. The door was unlocked. Empty. I sat in the same seat I'd once defended Helia from, a 19-year-old with cracked confidence and a dream too sharp for the room it entered. Now the walls seemed smaller. Or maybe I'd just outgrown the need for their approval. The anger wasn't there anymore. Not the way it had been. No fists clenched. No breath held. Just a strange floating stillness, like I'd carried a weight for so long I couldn't remember what it was like to stand without it. The only sound was the soft hum of an old projector in sleep mode. My phone buzzed. A message. From Emily. If I could choose again, I'd rather have you as my sister than have a Helia without a history. I stared at the words. They weren't enough to rewrite everything, but they were the first thing she'd written that felt real. Justice doesn't heal you, but it stops the bleeding. The park hadn't changed. Same winding path, same rust-colored benches. Even the old oak at the south edge of campus still stood with its crooked arm extended, like it had waited through the years just for this moment. I used to sit under it between lectures, headphones and notebook open, building dreams line by line in silence. Raymond walked beside me. No cane, no stoop. Just slower than I remembered. Or maybe I was just faster now. We hadn't said much since the hearing. A few words at the house. One call I didn't pick up. But today he asked to walk. He cleared his throat. I read the full report. Took me a few tries to understand some of the tech stuff. I smiled faintly. Most people don't. He stopped walking. Turned to me. Claire? I didn't know things were that bad. I should have asked. Should have listened. The wind stirred rustling dry leaves across the pavement. But I want you to know what you did. What you stood up for your mom, and I may not have agreed on much, but I know this much now. You're the strongest damn person in this family. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was the first time he'd ever said my name without comparing it to someone else's. Thanks, Dad, I said. Quiet. Real. We sat on the bench under the oak. For a moment, the years collapsed between us. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but the subject line caught my eye. Subject: Invitation. AI Futures Conference, July 2023. Dear Ms. Claire Morgan, we are pleased to invite you as a guest speaker at the AI Futures Conference hosted by Schroon Lake University in recognition of your contributions to early-stage neural architecture and ethical authorship in artificial intelligence. It didn't mention Emily, or Helia by name, but it didn't have to. I reread it twice. My thumb hovered over reply, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed to feel it. Raymond glanced at me. Something important? I nodded. An invitation. He didn't press, just waited. Miles called that evening. His voice was bright. I saw the conference notice they're listing your name solo. I haven't said yes yet. But you're going to, he said, like he already knew. I have one condition, I told him. They don't list me as Emily Morgan's sister. I want my own name. Just that. Miles was quiet for a beat. That's more than fair. Later that night, I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked in the reply box, steady and certain. Just like my choice. I typed confirmed. Claire Morgan will attend. Then I clicked send. I closed the laptop. And for the first time in years, I stepped outside the shadow of my own family. They erased me from their story. So I wrote a new one. The lights were soft, almost warm, not like the sterile fluorescence of old classrooms or the interrogating glare of academic hearings. This was different, intentional, dignified. Rows of seats stretched before me, filled with students, engineers, alumni, press. I stood behind the podium, a small card in my hand, though I hadn't looked at it once. A banner hung overhead, Helia, inspired by Claire Morgan. It was surreal, not because my name was there, but because it wasn't hidden. It wasn't a footnote. It wasn't disputed. It just was. The MC had introduced me without embellishment. Claire Morgan, developer of the original Helia logic framework and advocate for ethical innovation in AI. A sentence, but one I'd fought years to hear. I glanced down at the crowd. Somewhere in the third row, Miles gave a small nod. That steady kind of encouragement only old friends know how to give. I nodded back. I used to think I began that being the one who built something wasn't enough. That if no one remembered it, didn't matter. A pause. The quiet in the room wasn't empty, it leaned forward. But the truth is, sometimes your name is all you have. And sometimes, that's all you need. I didn't mention Emily, or Vivian, or the years of silence, denial, and erasure. That part of the story had already been told in tribunal documents, email trails, and memory. Today wasn't about the war. It was about the fact that I had survived it. After the session, people came up to shake my hand. A student asked if I'd mentor her final project. A reporter from a regional tech blog asked for a quote. I gave a polite smile, answered what I could, then stepped outside for air. The corridor behind the stage was quiet. A staff member approached, handing me a folded note. Someone asked me to give this to you. She didn't stay long. I opened the paper. From Emily. I won't try to take what was never mine again. Thank you for protecting it, even from me. No signature. Just that. I stood there for a while. Not sad, not elated. Just whole. Walking back through the lobby, I passed the large exhibit board for the new Helia prototype. Right beneath the title was a placard. Foundational Logic by Claire Morgan, 2017. It was etched in black against brushed aluminum. Permanent. Not an apology, not a consolation, a record. And when I caught my reflection in the glass, I didn't see the girl who'd been dismissed, ignored, or rewritten. I saw someone who'd stayed, fought, held the line. I smiled. They called me the founder, but what I felt was like a survivor. In the end, it wasn't applause or headlines that mattered, it was the quiet return of a name once stolen, now restored. Years of silence, betrayal, and injustice collapsed under the weight of a single truth brought into the light. Like a buried seed breaking through stone, justice didn't come quickly, but it came when it was needed most. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved, you leave a comment, type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you think justice still has more ground to cover. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories where silence is broken and truth wins.